beverages. Everybody's registered. Shut off your mic if you don't. Anyway, welcome to the Memory Workshop, hosted by the town of Woodside, Atherton, and Portola Valley. Kind of a unique thing that we're trying to do here. I want to welcome our special guest, Josephine. Josephine, who represents the future of memory. Josephine. She's Jennifer Lee's daughter. She's helping us out today. We're pleased that we have a turnout like this. We got about 25 people online. So the mic has to be a little bit different than you might be accustomed to so that the mic can coordinate with the picture that we're giving on Zoom. We're here because memory care, all of us, can be a life-changing decision. And those of us who are at that age where we are transitioning or about to, it's extremely important we understand what's happening, how do we deal with it, and then what the future is. And we have 3 organizations that are going to be speaking today. Sequoia Living, Farley. We have Kensington Place, and we have, speak up.
Kensington Place, and then we have Dr. Frank Longo, who is here. I'm sure some of you recognize him from the cover of Time magazine years ago, but we are so lucky that Dr. Longo is here, not only to bring his expertise from Stanford and what they're doing there, but really cutting edge opportunities for results to making a difference in Alzheimer's, in the disease, and we're going to hope for a cure. That's why I'm friends with him, is so that he can help us through this journey. But he is really dedicated. He and his wife, Anne, who's going to be coming soon, are really dedicated for the community. And so we're lucky that he can spend time with us.
Thank you, Susan. I want to start the message with Rebecca Flynn. She's the town council person from Portola Valley, and she'll be introducing the Sequoia Living.
Thank you. It's with very great pleasure that I want to introduce Sue Fairley, the Executive Director of Sequoia Living in Portola Valley. Sue is an experienced leader in senior living and healthcare with more than 30 years of leading complex health services organizations through growth, transformation, and cultural change. Sue is known for developing innovative programs that provide a more enriched experience for residents, as well as gets high marks for workforce stability and excellence in compliance. Sue has a unique understanding of older adults and their changing needs and deeply cares about helping others. She is lobbied at the state and national levels and brings a powerful voice for critical aging services. Please welcome Sue Fairley from the Sequoias.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. All right. Well, good morning. It's good to be here, and thank you for being here today. This is a conversation many families find themselves having at some point, sometimes proactively, sometimes after a change or concern arises. Today, my goal is to offer clarity, reassurance, and practical guidance as we talk about when it may become time to consider different living or care options and what those options can look like. Next slide. As was mentioned, I've spent more than 30 years in senior living and healthcare leadership, working alongside residents, families, care teams, as needs evolve over time. What has remained consistent is the importance of dignity, choice, and quality of life. At Sequoia's Portola Valley, we intentionally introduced approaches like the Montessori model for residents living with cognitive impairment, not to manage people, but to support purpose, autonomy, and meaningful engagement. Next slide. So what should people expect from a retirement community? Well, 4 main things: safety, support, dignity, and flexibility. At its core, a retirement community should enhance life, not limit it. People should expect to feel safe, supported, and respected while maintaining dignity and independence. Just as important is flexibility, because none of us stay exactly the same over time. The right community adapts as needs change rather than forcing people to navigate change alone. Next slide. So the core question, when is it time to look for living alternatives? This may be the most important question families ask and often the hardest. There is rarely a single moment or event. Instead, it's usually a series of small signals that prompt reflection. This question isn't about loss of independence. It's about whether the current environment still supports the whole person. Next slide. So the answer, when the living environment no longer fits. So the answer is simple but meaningful. It's time to consider alternatives when a living environment no longer meets someone's physical, social, emotional, or spiritual needs. That doesn't mean something has gone wrong. It means needs have changed. And that's a normal part of aging. Next slide. Some common signs that you may have seen in yourself or loved ones early that are often overlooked indicators. Often the first signs aren't medical crisis, but managing a household may become exhausting. Medications or health needs may increase. We might see preventable hospitalizations related to dehydration, poor nutrition, or missed care. These moments are important signals, not of failure, but of a need for additional support. Next slide. Additional indicators. So behavioral, physical, and financial changes. We also look for changes in mood or behavior, increased isolation, anxiety, or agitation. Falls and balance changes are common concerns. Changes in nutritional or unexplained weight loss can quietly impact health. And in some cases, financial management or vulnerability to fraud points to a need for additional protection and oversight. Next slide. Pathways of care and understanding the options. There are multiple pathways into care, and no two journeys look the same. Some people begin with independent living and add support as needed. Others may need assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing sooner. What matters most is matching care to the individual, not forcing the individual to fit the care. Next slide. The assessment process. How we assess for memory support. Transitions are never made lightly at Sequoia Living. Our assessment process is comprehensive and collaborative. We look at clinical and functional abilities, cognitive assessments, such as the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, safety considerations, and care needs. Just as important, we involve families and care teams because no one understands a person better than the people who love them. Next slide. Decision making. So who decides when a move is needed? Whenever possible, the resident remains at the center of decision making. When additional support is needed, families, legal decision makers, medical professionals, and community care teams work together. Our role is to guide and not dictate, to ensure the decision is thoughtful, informed, and respectful. Next slide. Couples and families. When only one partner needs care, this is one of the most emotional transitions families face. Our focus is always on maintaining connection, We offer flexible arrangements, opportunities for continued involvement, and support for both partners. Care should strengthen relationships, not fracture them. Next slide. Understanding memory support. What memory support is really like. Memory support today is very different from outdated stereotypes. These environments are secure yet welcoming, designed for familiarity, safety, and engagement. At Sequoias, memory support is integrated into the broader community, not isolated, because connection continues to matter deeply. Next slide. Engagement and quality of life. Purpose, choice, and adaptation. Quality of life doesn't disappear with cognitive change, it evolves. Residents have access to meaningful activities, structured support, and flexibility, and programs adapted to individual strengths and abilities. Engagement is not about keeping busy, it's about maintaining purpose. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, this one's kind of hard to read, and I'm just going to do a summary. And I believe the slides may be available to you following the presentation, so you can kind of get into the fine points at that point. But understandably, the financial picture is of concern. Costs are an important part of planning. Independent living offers different contract options, entrance fee ranges, and monthly costs depending on the unit size and contract type. And I'm just speaking about for Sequoia Living. There are different cost types in different communities that you go to. And so you would want to investigate those before you enter a community. Many services, meals, housekeeping, maintenance, activities, and transportation are included in the monthly service fee. And there may be some tax advantages because some of that is related to medical support. Our goal is transparency so families can plan with confidence rather than uncertainty. So now, hopefully, what I've shared has created some questions for you. Next slide. And I thank you for your time and attention, and I think we're open to questions.
If you have questions for her, we appreciate you to come up to the microphone here so that people in the Zoom audience can hear you.
I actually have a question. First of all, my mother lived at the Sequoias for over 5 years, and I can't say enough nice things about that in your leadership as well. And my father lived at Kensington Place. He has Alzheimer's. He had Alzheimer's, and they're both exceptional. But my question is, if you could explain maybe the difference between a buy-in versus a non-buy-in. So some senior communities just charge a monthly, and some senior communities have a buy-in. Maybe you could explain that.
Sure. The CCRC or life plan model is a model that you'll see throughout the country. And there is, generally speaking, an entrance fee. And typically the entrance fee is quite a significant sum. And how the entrance fee is utilized by these communities is that it helps with the preservation of the infrastructure and just the continuation of the community. Your monthly fee covers simply the services that you receive each month. So it's the buy-in kind of guarantees that you're going to have a place, or that there is a place for you to be throughout your aging, throughout the remainder of your life. So especially with a life plan community, they have different levels of care, and that is to help meet your needs as they change. Some people, it may be appropriate that you age in place and you are able to remain in your independent apartment for the duration of your life. We do have hospice services that come into independent living, but we also have regulations. Our community is governed by two separate sets of regulations. One is the Department of Social Services over our independent living and assisted living environments, and then the Department of Health is over our skilled nursing. So in many cases, I can't say in all cases, but in many cases, communities that have a buy-in their monthly fee may be a little bit lower than those communities that don't, but I can't say that is true for all places.
Thank you so much. But I think and we're going to talk a little bit about Kensington Place and the difference between a dedicated memory care community and something that offers all these different levels of care. And I guess my advice is, or maybe our advice today is, it is true, the doctor can talk about this, but it is true, people really are living longer. And so really to be proactive in what you may want to do. And really my message is to the sandwich generation, all the children that are now worried about their parents that are aging, but really to just do some homework now. It's like when you took your kids out to look at colleges, you want to take them a few years before they have to go. Do you want city life? Do you want something in the suburban? Do you want big? Do you want little? You should start doing your homework now to at least get on some lists. My parents, 25 years ago, I think, my parents got on the list at the Sequoias. And I am so thankful for that every day, because when they were ready, there was a place for them to go. So.
First, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. Could you describe, my mom was in, everybody's got a story about their mom or dad. She was at a place that had independent living and went to assisted living, skilled nursing, and finally memory care. But she went back and forth, and she had her own beautiful 2-bedroom condominium. I was pretty impressed. Could you just describe the different levels of care, what that involves? I mean, what's the difference between independent and, I sort of intuitively know what my mom went through, but I'd be interested to know what it is at the Sequoias and going back and forth. I mean, sometimes, you have a fall, you end up in skilled, and then can you go back to independent?
True.
Those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, independent living for Sequoias is where most people enter our community. And most of our residents in independent living are totally independent when they come in. We do offer a meal plan, so most of our units at this point do have kitchens, where back in the day when Sequoias was built, they didn't have kitchens, or they had very minimal kitchen ability in their apartments. So that has changed. We do have a clinic and nurses on staff who can respond to emergencies 7 days a week, and they're there for approximately 16 hours a day for our independent living residents to really meet those healthcare needs should they be required. But in most cases, independent living is independent. Most of our residents in independent living have a vehicle, even though we do offer transportation. We have lots of activities on campus, many generated by residents. But it needs to be thought of as pretty independent, as if you were still in your own home, but services are available as you need them. We also have outpatient rehab that can go to your apartment and help you if that is something that you need. As far as assisted living goes, residents will move to assisted living when on a regular basis they need help with their activities of daily living. So they need help with maybe medication management, or they need help with dressing and bathing, or they need they need assistance with a couple, 2 or 3 of those details, and those needs won't be met by just bringing in a few hours of care per day, which they can do in independent living. So this is for people who need someone around 24/7. So they need to be able to access assistance or help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't require necessarily medical assistance. When you require medical assistance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or that supervision, that would be more of our nursing home environment. We also do accept patients from the outside community into our skilled nursing, which I might say is a 5-star skilled nursing community. And you can go there for a short-term stay and get rehab services there. Typically, the back and forth will happen where, let's say you're in independent living and either maybe you have a surgery or you have a fall, you break a hip, you go to the skilled nursing, you rehab, and then you can go back home. Our goal is to always bring residents back to their highest level of ability and living. So if that means going back to your independent unit, sometimes it means that your needs have changed and now it's time to really take a look at maybe assisted living is the environment that fits best for you. Sometimes if we're noticing cognitive changes and the doctor supports that move, as a group, an interdisciplinary team, along with the family, we work with the resident to help them move into a more secured environment, which is the gardens at Sequoia Living.
Hi, you touched on the spouse dynamic. Can you talk a little bit about that, or a little bit more, like how do you know when one spouse is really, very capable and young and I mean, they're the same age, but able to take care of everything, and they're just exhausted with the other spouse who, it's unclear when the right time is for memory care. Can you maybe give a case study or talk a little about some examples of how that's navigated?
Sure.
Thank you. With the sandwich generation?
I think she's talking.
That is not an unusual situation. It's a situation that occurs quite a bit where, because most people don't age and have the same issues at the same time. What we find, I think it becomes very evident that one becomes a caregiver and one is the person who's getting the primary care. We do try to remain really sensitive. Most couples will want to stay together, while some may say, okay, it's time. And they may be willing to kind of split up. So one may remain in independent living while the other may go to assisted living. I can think of one case recently where we had a couple and the wife was very much able to continue her regular routine, whereas her husband had several medical issues going on that were progressive. And so they made the choice, which was, it's always better if the resident makes the choice, but they made the choice for him to move into assisted living where he was able to remain for the remainder of his life. But they still had a lot of contact, had meals together, and were able to maintain that connection. But she wasn't being depleted because of the caregiving and the constant caregiving that was required for him.
I actually think that's a huge advantage of having this continuing life thing, is the options are there, because some senior living communities are just independent. And then if you have some memory issues or you need assisted living, that's when you would really have to split up. So there's some big advantages of having this continuing life.
Actually have a question as well. You had mentioned one of the first signs to look for was issues with financial management and the vulnerability to fraud. Does the Sequoias have programs for your residents to sort of educate them on financial fraud and, digital literacy and and how to avoid some of those issues?
We do. We do have regular forums, and I would say a few times a year, we will have speakers come out and talk to residents at our community forums about fraud. Unfortunately, this kind of touches us all. None of us are immune of falling for some sort of fraud. It doesn't just happen to seniors. But yes, we do have education that happens frequently throughout the year. We also send out notices. Our IT department at Sequoia Living does put out monthly kind of news about things to look forward to, scams and different things that residents may encounter. So we're doing it a couple ways to address that.
Great. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Can we move on to Susan Evans and
Sure. Do you want to,
Leander Sims?
sit here, Leandra? Maybe you and Sue could switch. Hello again. I'd like to introduce Leander Sims, who I have known for years. As I shared with you before, we moved my father to Kensington Place in 2016. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at Stanford. And as he progressed, we did everything to try to keep him at home. And I see Peninsula volunteers here. My dad spent a lot of time at Rosner House, which is an adult day for dementia. And they are phenomenal. But I was 100%, I'm keeping my dad at home. And as his disease progressed, it was going to take my mother and my father away from me from this dreadful disease. And reluctantly, I gave in to my mother, who said, we need to do this for me, for my health, because it was really draining on her, even with I brought art in, I brought music in, I took my dad to a gym to walk, I tried to keep him active, but I could not provide enough activity for him that made him happy, and he became very agitated. And we chose Kensington Place because, different from the Sequoias, Kensington Place is dedicated memory care. That is all that Kensington provides as a service, is dedicated memory care. And I'm so lucky to have Leander Sims here, who I have the utmost respect for, and she's going to share a little bit with you about what does that look like? Why is our memory care different from the Sequoias, which is great, the gardens, but dedicated memory care has a little bit of different characteristic, and we're going to talk about that for a little bit today. But anyway, I am grateful to Kensington. My dad lived there 7.5 years, and making the move, I didn't realize, but it gave me the relationship back with both my parents. It took the struggle out, and it also gave my mother the relationship back with my dad, taking the struggle out, because Kensington really took on all the heavy lifting. And my mom could simply go and have lunch with my dad and enjoy the time left that she had with him. But Leander, tell us a little bit about memory care, dedicated memory care, and how the community would look different from like the Sequoias having the different levels. I know that the memory care has different levels, but what makes us a little different?
Well, hi. So as she said, I've been in Kensington for 11 years. So did get to see Sue's dad, amazing. As well as I worked at assisted living. So I'm pretty familiar with assisted living. And as I was in those assisted living, I started falling in love with the people that were living with cognitive change or brain change and wanting to spend more time with them. And they were going into places for people living with brain changes, which are called memory cares. Very interesting that we call it memory care, because brain change, for any of you who have loved ones, it's so different than memory care. It's so much more. In fact, it can not even be memory loss sometimes. The brain change. So I like to say living with dementia or living with brain change. And that's what we love to support. And I think the biggest difference for us is that we actually have two environments. We have one for kind of that support one neighborhood that has care and support, and one that has even more care and support. That's what I like to say. And we also have dedicated nurses in our memory care, that are there 24 hours a day, that make a really big difference for our residents. But the biggest thing that I love is we use training from Positive Approach to Care. So those of you who have not heard of Teepa Snow, if you are helping or supporting anyone with brain change, Teepa Snow is definitely someone to follow and look up. You may have heard of her. She teaches all over the world. And she is basically, a lot of people know her from Bruce Willis. She helped Bruce Willis. Emma Willis mentions her in her book. She's just an amazing person. I got certified in Positive Approach to Care many years ago and found a way that works. And so I think that's really what I love about a dedicated member care is the very specific training that we do for all of our staff, from everyone, like from the head to the toes, like housekeeping all the way to directors. Everybody is trained to change their point of view and change for the people living with brain change. So that's really, in a nutshell, how do you do? How do you do?
You did great. So the reason we chose Kensington is because they are the gold standard in memory care, but we also chose it because I never wanted to make this move again, ever. It's the hardest thing I ever did. I actually started a nonprofit because it sent me into a tizzy. But so there's two communities. So there's Connections, where my dad moved into. He lived there for 4 years. And then upstairs is Haven, which is made a lot of people on hospice, as I know Sue mentioned hospice. And hospice is a critical component to understand and educate yourself on. I thought I had kind of knew everything about my dad's journey, and hospice was a way new thing for me to learn about. And so there's two different neighborhoods. So once you move in, you can stay for the entire time, which is so nice for the family and for the residents. And maybe you could speak about Teepa Snow and the Positive Approach to Care. Kensington, throughout the country, there's 8 communities throughout the country, is actually training and working with cities to be dementia-friendly cities, with the fire department, the police department, the EMTs, and explain how, just a few examples maybe, about how would an EMT or how would a 911 call, how would this positive approach to care assist in dealing with someone with brain change?
Yeah, that sort of happened organically, that we started to work with the city, because I think it happened basically as in the 911 calls. We found like, wow, they really need to start to understand, because positive approach to care really helps us support and change. For an example, people living with brain change experience a lot of vision change. So we noticed that when 911 was rolling into the building, they were all coming over the resident who maybe had a fall. And picture yourself, you're down on the ground, you've got vision like this, and then you've got 7 people like, are you okay? Do you want to go to the hospital? And they, of course, were saying, no, right? So we started to say, hey, everyone could use some help in this training. And that started to become a passion of ours. And then just said, hey, can we come over to the fire department and train? And the next thing we knew, the library was like, hey, you want to come help us out at the library? We could use some help. And so that's basically been one of our goals, is so that our residents can walk and be in a community that is friendly, that is understanding, that maybe can understand a little bit of change in impulse control. Some people call it filter, or but maybe can be a little more compassionate. And sort of get people past the stigma of living with brain change and let people just live with brain change. I think that's our goal at Kensington too, is to live and enjoy and love and be a big part of your family, I guess, make your family a little bigger and support you, which is sort of what happened to you. I think that's what you're describing. You were so dreadfully afraid of it. And then what ended up happening is you just sort of grew your family and all worked together to take care of your dad.
I think it was Leandra that said to me, because when you have a loved one that's going through brain change, it's brutal. And it's brutal on you, not on them, but it's really brutal on the family. And I think you took my hand and you said, your dad's heart is still there, and just spend this time with him. And it's true. And maybe you can give the example, just one little example about the hand and the difference in the approach with someone with brain change that really diminishes the agitation and brings that love back together?
So, well, I'll start with so instead of agitation, I really love to say that they have expressive communication because almost all the time, people living with brain change, the fight or flight response or the amygdala in their brain can get triggered really easily. It just gets more active. A lot of people think of brain change as because the brain is changing. The brain is dying essentially. But some of the parts of the brain become more active. And one of the parts of the brain that becomes the most active is this amygdala, which is your fight or flight response. So a lot of people think of agitation or aggression or behavior, and we really don't even say that at Kensington anymore. We say that they have expressive communication, and it's because they need something. So we're always looking for kind of what they need. So I wanted to start there and then say that I think that what it is that when people are having a hard time, instead of some of the ways we used to think about it, which was redirection or distraction, or even maybe a white lie or a happy lie, we avoid all of those things, and we look at how can I give this person some purpose and how can I start meeting their needs? Because, for example, if a person has to go to the bathroom, bingo is not going to help, right? So
Not at that time.
it's important, so really that's what we really try and figure out. But they may not be able to say, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. It just looks like, hey, is all I get. I have to watch them and figure out what they need. And then that's how we train everyone. Say, let's pay attention to what they need and let's support them in a different way. So,
And one thing that I experienced with my father was if you're trying to get someone to come with you, how do I hold their hand?
so this is very important that when for two reasons. One is that we talked about that if you're living with a lot of vision change and your vision is changing, the last thing that's going to help you is someone holding you underneath your arm. One, like this. You don't like to be touched like this. No one likes this. And also, if I come here and put you on top and put my hand under your hand, you can squeeze my hand as much as you want, no matter how frustrated you are, because this part of my hand is very strong. And also, I'm giving you back. Like we're going back into a relationship together. And we really, at the core of the care, or in positive approach care, we're looking to keep connection and keep our relationship in place over anything else. Anything else takes a second to the relationship that I have with that person. And this keeps my relationship. We're doing things together. I don't want to do two. I don't want to force you or make you do anything. We're going to do everything together. And when I'm holding your hand like this and you're on top, you're in charge. And it really does help a whole lot.
I noticed a huge difference with my dad. Rather than saying, here, come here, I allowed him to take me, which gave him purpose back. And I want to just talk a little bit about purpose and the importance of that. My dad, who ran his own company, some of you in here probably know him, Oz Pieper, but he was like a mayor in town. And he always wanted to be in charge. And the people at Kensington, the team at Kensington, the executive director, I should acknowledge April in the back there, but they would take my dad to their meetings and say, here's your pad of paper, here's your pen. He couldn't write anymore, but he would go in those meetings and I would spy on him through the window and he'd just be sitting there like, I've got my meeting. And so talk a little bit about pocket programming.
So a lot of times it's great because we have the two neighborhoods, which makes it even more amazing. So we can create programming that really supports our residents. But purpose goes along with that stigma that living with dementia means that you can't do anything anymore. And that's just not the case. First of all, the best advice I have ever gotten in my life was from someone living with brain change. So if you ever want some really good, truthful, real advice, go. And she said, you know what you should do, honey? You should think of what you want to do and tell people how they can help you. And that is actually how I went about shifting our culture as I learned positive approach to care. I thought about what I wanted to do and told people how they're going to help me. And that came from someone living with brain change. They have so much to give and so much important things to do in life. One of them can be advice, but it can be many other things. And we try and find what it is, who that person is, and help support them to continue to do and be part of it. And yes, our residents sometimes fold napkins, sometimes they sweep the floor, sometimes they put away cups. Really, they help us and support wherever they can. But again, it is about the relationship at the core. And I think if you think of just keeping someone busy, they feel that versus giving them something to do and something that's truly meaningful in their life. So I do think we really work hard. I myself get a lot of purpose out of supporting people with brain change. And I think about that a lot. And what would my life be like if I didn't have that? And I think I put myself in their shoes and I look for ways that they can feel that same ongoing meaning and purpose.
Do we have any questions? Looks like you covered it.
Oh, we have one question.
Go ahead.
Could you describe the two neighborhoods?
Yeah, so he was, just in case it's not on the mic, he was asking if we could describe the two neighborhoods. So the first neighborhood that we have is called Connections, and it has a care ratio of about 5 care partners, so 1, and then we have dedicated engagement in that neighborhood. What we look for in that neighborhood is creating a lot of routine, because very early in progression, as your hippocampus is changing, you need lots of routine. And it really helps me feel so good and supported if I can figure out where I am in my day. So it really does help if I have exercise at 10. So we create a lot of a walk at 10:30, a brain game at 11. We call that the magic hour, where after you've had hydration and a walk and exercise, you do these amazing brain games and feel really good. We create social environments. We do a daily happy hour with live music, but it's very routined and everything to help support that. Eventually, that starts to shift and change a little bit. And then we start having Haven, and that neighborhood has the same, but even more. So now we're about three residents per care partner. So we have more people to support and lots more smaller groups now. And that is also, as my vision changes, I don't want to do exercise while someone's, for example, have someone follow me to do exercise, because if my vision is reducing or I don't have a lot of visual regard, following someone in exercise might not be helpful. So we're going to do different kinds of exercise that is using your hands, maybe bands or like a racket and a balloon, so that it's more physical. Also, more of the activities I'm going to start putting in front of you so that you can continue to engage, but it's not far away from you. I'm not going to ask you to engage with a sing-along on the TV. I'm going to have you engage with a sing-along in a book. So it's easy to, so a lot of shifts we make are to support the progression and just to help support people in a different way.
Go ahead.
Answer? Thank you. The same thing was happening to me when I first started. I was like, why did they put me in charge? I'm going to need some training. So that is why I reached out and started Found Pack, because to your point, everything was like a lot. I learned a lot about Alzheimer's specifically, not the vascular. I didn't get a whole lot of FTD, and I didn't get a lot of Lewy body. I didn't quite understand those dementias. And when they popped into the community, I needed to understand that these were different dementias. But then also I started to learn some actual skills. So a great example of a skill was that hand under hand, but also one of the best skills I ever learned was visual verbal touch. Make sure they see you, make sure they hear you, and then touch them. And I, as an activity director, I had when I started, had no idea that I had been like touching people without them seeing me, and it was startling them. And so that's a very simple skill, but it made such a big difference. I stopped at 6 feet away from them and said, "Hey, it's Leandra. Hi." And I reached out my hand, and then they would take my hand, and also getting low so that they can see you, making sure that they're not just seeing maybe just my chest or maybe just a big black, jacket or whatever flowers I was wearing. So I did find that positive approach to care taught me actual skills. Um, it's it's really important because, to your point, it's really great to know about dementia, but at the end of the day, I need some help to get them in the shower. Like, it didn't help me get them to shower, and it felt like I was forcing people. And I really think I highly recommend. There's lots of great videos on YouTube. You can reach out to Positive Approach to Care. There's lots of ways to reach out. But I highly, if you are supporting someone with brain change, developing some really easy, simple skills. It may seem simple, but it really makes it made a big, big difference for me. The best one I can think of is know your agenda, but don't show your agenda. Teepa had taught me that, to know what it was I wanted, but keeping that agenda a secret was a big, big thing. So if you walk into someone's room and say it's your shower day, I already took my shower. You can, and I'm going to add some profanity, but we're at a thing. So, but that's pretty much what you would hear. Yes, I won't say all the words. But just knowing what it was I wanted to do, but helping that person feel it was their idea made a really big difference. I heard they have breakfast and some coffee out there. I wanted to see if you'd like some. Yeah, I'd love that. Great. Should we freshen up before, or what you're thinking, right? To help support someone made a huge difference. So it does require a lot of skill, and that's why we do a whole lot of training. Every team member that comes into our community, before they even come into our community, they get over 8 hours of specifically packed training, dementia videos, and quizzes. And then live training once they've come into our community. They then have another 8-hour class. And then at every department meeting, every town hall, every time we meet, we talk about it, and we continue to develop skills in our team. And we have lots of certified team members that coach and support our team.
For those of you who are still caring for your loved one at home, the Alzheimer's Association has a lot of training, and some of that is available on videos on their website, alz.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Oh,
sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of other, the Alzheimer's Association is a great place to start and go look. There's also an amazing organization called Dementia Minds. They offer all over the nation. They offer Zoom talk and support groups. And my favorite thing about it is that only people living with brain change or people living with dementia are the speakers and the educators, because those are the people we don't listen to. Those are the people who don't have as big of a voice. So I love, if you ever get a chance to go and hear, they have once a month, they have these forums and people living with brain change speak, and it's quite incredible to hear them. That's who I learned the most from, by the way. If you really want to learn about it, talk to the people living with brain change. They'll teach you, if you allow them to be your teacher.
and I also know that Kensington Place has support groups, because you brought that up, and it's so important because it's really a family, a network of a team that is supporting one person. It's family members, it's friends. And to let everybody know really what the team is doing is so important. And we have family caregiver support groups to help navigate that. And Linda, thank you. Yes, the Alzheimer's Association is also a great option. But Stanford also has support groups with their senior services organization too, and they're very local.
I guess we'll end on that. It's okay to ask for some support and help, and we'll move over to how Stanford helps and supports our community.
Any other questions? Yes?
Changes being caused by Alzheimer's, and what are they exactly?
That's a really good question. So she was asking about vision changes. Often the occipital lobe, which is in the back of your brain, does start to shift. And so those changes cause, no matter what, our vision changes over time. Our peripheral vision, you've probably noticed as you aged, you don't have like the range that you used to, and it's probably narrowed in. But as the occipital lobe changes, it's just almost like less data coming into that occipital lobe. So it's just less space to process what I'm seeing. So it just gets narrower and narrower to where it's almost binocular. And then sometimes I even close my eyes to do a task. So towards the end of progression, you often close your eyes so that you can chew or maybe even hear what someone's saying and process it. So I might shut down the occipital lobe so that I can work on other things. It's really important. It really was one of the biggest ahas I ever had was that they couldn't see me as well as they used to. And if I could just get into their field of vision, I was a face and a smiling face versus a blob or or even from behind them, I was startling them if you come up from behind or to the side. Or even just eating sometimes, unless I look down, if my vision is changing, unless I look down, I didn't know there was a plate there. So those kind of things really helped me really support people. So great thing to start to think about and understand. If you want to understand it, spend 5 minutes walking around your house tonight with like this, and you'll start to see what it might feel like. So
A good point was just brought up that we have questions online.
Yes, do you have any questions? Online?
Thank you for that.
No question.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Leandra. Thank you, Sue. Now I'm so excited to introduce Frank Longo, and I am not going to read his bio because I'm going to let him tell you about who he is. And Dr. Longo, if you would share with this audience why you do what you do. I think we're very interested in what you've done, what you're doing, and where we're going.
Take a break at all, or are we going right?
I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay,
Do you need a break?
I'm good.
You got their attention.
I'm good. So, yeah, I'm happy to add some introductions. So I'm Frank Longo. I'm a neurologist over at Stanford. Why do I do what I do? My interest in the brain came from when I was a child. I'm one of 6 children, and my younger sister, Patty, who's a year younger than me, was born with cerebral palsy. That's brain damage at birth. She was born prematurely. My mother was a nurse, and so I tagged along on many doctor appointments for my sister Patty, who was in a wheelchair and cognitively impaired. And my basic question as a kid, 7 or 8-year-old kid, was why can't they make Patty walk? And my mother explained that there are no good treatments for the brain. And that just stuck in my head somehow. There are no treatments for the brain. I just couldn't accept that. No treatments for the brain. So I was a nerd as a kid. I liked science, and I went to college, science major. And then in medical school, I paid attention to brain things, and I had just an inspirational faculty member who taught about how the brain is formed. And that's where I learned that these are very powerful forces in nature that allow us to put our brains together and get all the connections right. And I thought these forces are so powerful, if we could figure out how to harness them and turn them into therapies, maybe we could finally, have brain treatment. So that's how I got started in this. And so after medical school, I did my neurology training up the road at UCSF. And then I was asked to stay on as faculty there. So I spent about 18 years at UCSF. I ended up becoming the vice chair of the Department of Neurology there. And then doing research on how the brain degenerates in Alzheimer's and other areas as well, other neurodegenerative diseases. And then I spent a short time in North Carolina as chair of neurology there, where I worked with Teepa Snow, who was such an inspiration to me. She trained me quite a bit too. And she and I used to do talks together. And then I came to Stanford 20 years ago now, and to be the chair of the neurology department at Stanford. So I have a laboratory at Stanford where, and I'll share some of the research with you, with the goal of creating therapeutics for neurodegenerative diseases and brain problems. And I've also worked for years in the memory clinic at Stanford, and I've had the opportunity to take care of patients at Sequoia's in Kensington. I've visited both. They're both wonderful places, and the teams that work there are my heroes to be able to take care of these patients. And then 2 years ago, I stepped down from the chair role, and I'm just full-time research now. And as I'll describe, my wife Ann and I started a company and to do the commercial aspects of therapeutic development to prevent and treat Alzheimer's. And I'll share some of that with you. So that's my background, a nerdy kid who wanted to fix the brain.
I actually have a funny story about the Longos. I told you I started a nonprofit because I like Frank, when his mother said we can't do anything for the brain, I was like, I can't help my dad. I've never felt so desperate in my life. And now I'm moving him into a community. I mean, I just felt the guilt was just overwhelming. And so I had a meeting with the Longos, who are a nonprofit supported Stanford Neurology. And I went over to their house with actually a check from our nonprofit. I was so excited to deliver it. And the Longos met me at the front door and they said, hi. And I said, hi, I'm here. And they're like, they laughed afterwards. They laughed so hard afterwards. They thought I was coming there with a check to get some type of a pill for my father that could suddenly make him better. And they were so relieved, like, oh, we're so glad you're here just to donate to us. So anyway.
And we really appreciate all the, donations that you've made possible.
Oh, well, you know what? We can't do this without it.
To
We
run
can't do this.
to run a research lab, it's the whole community supports us in that mission. So I'm happy to take about 30 minutes to share updates from the field on strategies to have brain health, prevent dementia, or how to treat it once it occurs. We'll talk about the different dementias. Then we'll save plenty of time for questions. And so that'll be the format here. But in the big picture, and really as part of the discussion today, I think what we're seeing, we have a health lifespan, right? And you'll hear more and more about the health span. So as long as we live, how can we be healthy for most of that time? And now we're also talking about a cognitive health span. How can we be cognitively intact for as much as our lifespan as possible? Because what we're seeing is our colleagues in cardiology and cancer fields, they're getting better and better at what they do. I mean, they have a ways to go, of course. But what we see coming to our clinic are people who are pretty fit and who are in pretty good shape in their 70s and 80s or early 90s, and everything would be going pretty well for them, except they've lost their cognition. And this what we're trying to avoid is this 15 or 20 years of cognitive impairment toward the end of life. And I think we're making progress, and I'll share that with you. But that's the big picture of what we're doing. You can go to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about the stages that we go through and introduce a few terms. If you're interested in brain health, which everyone here is, I'm assuming, you do have to educate yourself on some of these terms that you'll read about. I'm going to treat everyone here like a Stanford medical student. So I'm going to put you to work using your brain, and you're going to remember some of this, right? So this is not a passive exercise, okay? We're hard on the med students. They got to know what they're doing. My wife, Ann, just walked in. I'll introduce her. There's Ann. You'll hear about her more later. So this is the process that we're all along this path. If we're lucky, we start off with normal cognition. And then as we get a little bit older, many people experience what we call subjective cognitive impairment. This is the feeling that my memory or other aspects of my cognition aren't quite where they were. And if you were to go in and get formally tested, your scores would still be in the normal range. We can't detect any cognitive impairment, but you feel you have it. So we call that subjective cognitive impairment, fairly common. And then some people go on to have a little bit more cognitive impairment. We call that age-related cognitive impairment. And this goes along with normal aging. So some of our cognitive skills, short-term memory, executive function, the ability to multitask, peaks at around age 30. And then by the time we get into our 50s, many of us know a slight change, but it really doesn't affect our our day-to-day function. And that's what we call normal age-related cognitive impairment. But many of us will go on to get what's called mild cognitive impairment, MCI. You'll read about this quite a bit. What's mild cognitive impairment? This is if you come in and get tested formally, your cognitive testing will score statistically significantly below your age-matched group. So we can detect a cognitive impairment on testing. However, your day-to-day function is still mostly intact. So we call that mild cognitive impairment. And that's as opposed to going on to actually have a dementia. And what a dementia means, you have both. If we test you, your cognition is impaired and you're having trouble with day-to-day function. And so if you have both of those things, you have what we call as a dementia. So that's how we define a dementia. MCI is fairly common. If you have diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, over the subsequent 5 years, you've got about a 40% chance of coming down with a dementia. And we'll talk about blood tests coming out now that can help us refine that prediction on a given patient. Dementia is a broad term, many kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's is just one kind of dementia. It happens to be the most common, so you'll hear us talk about that a lot. I'll talk about that today. But the principles of Alzheimer's apply to some of the other dementias. Two other common dementias are vascular dementia, the small blood vessels in the brain getting plugged up, or Lewy body dementia, a blend of some Parkinsonian features as well as cognitive features. That's fairly common as well. It's the job of the neurologist or the geriatrician or the internist to figure out, number one, is a dementia present or is an MCI present? And if it is, what kind is it? Is it Alzheimer's? Is it Lewy bodies? And I'll talk more about the workup that we do. I'm showing some images here of what goes on in the brain. I think any of us interested in brain health should be able to look inside the brain. In the case of Alzheimer's, we have three major processes. Amyloid plaques, that brown substance there. Amyloid is a fragment of a protein. It accumulates in the brain. We don't know why yet. And it's toxic to the connections between the neurons. Those connections are called synapses. So it causes those synapses to degenerate. The amyloid starts accumulating about 20 years before cognitive symptoms start. So if you're bound to get a dementia at age 70, by around age 50, you started accumulating amyloid. Now, the good part of that is we've got a long opportunity window. If we can delay onset of the dementia, we've got 20 years to work with. So that's good. Second process is there's a protein called tau that has a normal job, but abnormal forms of that protein, tau, start to accumulate inside neurons. So that dark substance in the middle figure there is the abnormal tau accumulating in the neurons, and it's toxic to those neurons, and it'll cause the neurons to lose their synaptic connections again. You don't want to lose those synaptic connections. And finally, neuroinflammation. The brain has its equivalent of a white blood cell or immune cell called a microglia. The one on the upper panel there is a normal, happy microglia, but the one on the lower panel is reacting as if there's a foreign body in the brain. It might be reacting to the amyloid or the tau or other things. And when it reacts, it releases cytokines. Those are chemicals that cause damage to the synapses. And so Alzheimer's is also an inflammatory story. And it's also linked to peripheral inflammation in the body. And when we talk about lifestyle effects, we talk about inflammation because peripheral inflammation can trigger brain inflammation as well. We'll talk more about that. So I have a little picture on the right-hand side here of a synapse. There's a neuron there. There's that purple dendrite or connection, and it has these little nubs that we call spines. And then we've got these blue connections coming in from other neurons, and the red circle is forming around two synapses. And those little purple nubs are called spines. Those are the most delicate part of the synapses. If you're interested in brain health, you need to know what a synapse is. It's the bottom line. It's the connection between your neurons. And whether you have Alzheimer's or Lewy body or Parkinson's, the bottom line is you're losing the synaptic connections. With age, you're losing these synaptic connections. So that's my anchor, what we need to minimize is the loss of these synaptic connections. So when we talk about lifestyle changes in this therapy and that therapy, I drill down and say, how is it affecting synapses? When you start to lose your memory, it's because you've lost synapses that you need for memory. So it's the synapse. Okay, we'll go to the next slide.
That's our word of the day.
Synapse. And if you remember that, you formed a new synapse. That's because this is a dynamic process. The synapses are coming and going. Okay, so if you were to come to the Stanford Memory Clinic, what we'd be doing, and some of you have probably already had experiences there yourself or with family members. So when people are concerned about cognitive function, whether it's memory or other kinds of cognitive function, we take a careful history. We need to know every detail about the time course. When did it start? How did it start? Does it fluctuate? Is it continuous? Does it come and go? I could ask you 100 questions about the time course. The neurologic exam, a careful exam, we're looking for clues. Are there subtle Parkinsonian features that no one else noticed? Now I'm going to be thinking about Lewy body, not just Alzheimer's. So I'm going to go over every detail of the patient's neurologic exam. The cognitive exam, we might start off with the 30-point screening. You heard about the MoCA, that stands for the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. There's another one called the MMSE, and 27 to 30 points is normal. And we'll see where you land. Now, this is a screening that takes 15 or 20 minutes. If we're really concerned, we need a more detailed cognitive profile, and then one of our PhD neuropsychologists will do those. They could take 4 or 5 hours. It's a separate appointment, and there they more carefully quantitate each of the cognitive, we call them domains. There's memory, there's language, there's visual spatial ability, there's executive function. So those are different parts of the cognition we'll talk more about later. We'll do an MRI scan, not because it tells us anything about Alzheimer's. An MRI scan cannot detect Alzheimer's. That's people think it can. It cannot. Why are we getting an MRI scan? We're looking for other features of the brain. Is there too much fluid building up in the brain? It's called normal pressure hydrocephalus. That can cause memory loss, and we can treat that. We don't want to miss things that we can cure quickly. Is there a brain tumor? That can cause cognitive loss. Well, we can deal with a brain tumor. We're looking for other things with that MRI scan. So on the top picture here is a normal MRI scan, and the one on the right is an Alzheimer's patient with an MRI scan. And to an untrained eye, they look pretty similar because they are. But if you know where the hippocampus is, I don't have a pointer here. In the Alzheimer's patient, the hippocampus is a little shrunken, but this is not a highly quantitative process. So it's not a precise way. We can do an amyloid PET scan. The blue color is a lower level of amyloid in the normal person. The Alzheimer's person has this yellow and red. Those are higher levels of amyloid. This is an expensive, complicated scan. We don't get it routinely. It's about $7,000 or $8,000 if you have to pay yourself. But it can be done there. That's what amyloid looks like on an amyloid PET scan. Now, more recently, this is really revolutionizing the field. We have emerging blood tests, right? And one that you may have read about is called phospho-tau or p-tau217. This was FDA approved last year. I can make these slides available for everybody, by the way, so you don't have to take too many notes. So the tau217, it's an abnormal form of tau that leaks from the brain into the blood, and it goes up as Alzheimer's pathology is developing in the brain. Right now, the FDA has approved it for people that are symptomatic. They have some kind of cognitive impairment, and the physician is trying to figure out, is it Alzheimer's or is it something else? If the tau217 is elevated, it makes it very, very likely it's Alzheimer's rather than another cause of dementia. The different companies offer this. They have different degrees of accuracy. The best accuracy is about 92% accurate in a symptomatic person, that if this level is elevated, there's Alzheimer's pathology in the brain. This is a game changer that for a few $100s, you can get a blood test. You don't need that amyloid PET scan, right? So a lot of the physicians are still learning about this. As neurologists, we order this routinely, but I know many of my colleagues that are primary care physicians I have great respect for. They have to be smarter than me because they have to know about all diseases, right? But many physicians are still learning about this. We're getting asked a lot about people that don't have cognitive symptoms. Should I get my tau217? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But where this is going is in a research setting now. I think what we're seeing emerging are blood tests like the tau217 that sort of can be used as a clock to tell you as an individual whether you will get dementia, and when. Is it 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? It's not that accurate yet, but that's where the field's heading. And that raises all kinds of questions that we could talk about. Why don't we go to the next slide? And this gives us a sense of that. So on the left-hand side, this research followed people over time, about 6 years. And on the y-axis on the left-hand side, the MMSE, mini mental status exam, as I mentioned, 27 to 30 is normal. And you can see in the green line, those people are staying pretty stable over 6 years on their cognitive testing. And those are the people whose tau 217 in the blood was negative. It was not elevated. So that predicted that they would do pretty well over the next 6 years, right? But the red line are people whose tau 217 blood test was elevated. Look what happened to them. They're going down over time. So this blood test is predicting who will drift down over time in a research setting with a group of people. It's not quite accurate enough yet that I can tell you as one person. I can't give you exact years of when your cognition will change, but it gives us a rough idea. If I'm going to get my 217 done soon. I haven't had time to do it yet. I'm hoping it's in the normal range. If it's elevated, it means I'm at much higher risk that over the next few years, I'll start to notice some cognitive change. The graph on the right is people with mild cognitive impairment, and the ones that had the high 217 are shown that red curve coming down over about a 6-year period. So if you have MCI, and if your tau 217 blood test is high, you've got about a 50% chance then of going down, shifting from MCI to dementia if your 217 is high. So we order this in the setting of MCI too. So to summarize then, we will see more of these blood tests. They will become more and more accurate, and they'll really force us all to think about what do we want to know and what can we do about it. So the field's changing very quickly. 2 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about blood tests that you could get from your primary care physician to predict this. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about dementia prevention strategies. These apply both to those of us who might have normal cognition, trying to delay onset, but also people who might already be having cognitive issues. I think many of these principles apply as well to slow down that progression. So we'll talk about physical exercise, diet, cognitive activity, and sleep. This is where most of the research is. There are other things that you might want to ask about, but these have the most data and probably the largest effects. I want to say right out front that most of what we know about these are from association studies. So as a student, you need to know the difference between association and causality. You have to know that, even as a casual observer of brain health. So when we read about lack of sleep is associated with something, that's great, but it doesn't prove that lack of sleep causes something. So always remember that. So most of the studies here are association because it's hard to do a randomized controlled trial. That's what you need to prove a causality. Okay, next slide. Let's start with physical exercise. There have been many studies in this field. On the left-hand side, I'm just showing a few, did an overview of the hundreds of published papers on exercise effects on cognition. When people formally review many papers, it's called a meta-analysis. But overall, exercise can reduce the risk of dementia by anywhere from 30 to 60%. Most people think you need moderate or vigorous exercise, versus way easy exercise. I'll talk about that. And probably doing different things is mixing it up, whether it's aerobic or weight or resistance is probably beneficial as well. So what's moderate exercise? Moderate exercise is getting your heart rate up to 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate capacity. So to know your maximum heart rate, you take 220 and subtract your age. That gives you a number that's your maximum heart rate. And you can Google this as well, look up maximum heart rate calculation. And then if you're at 50 to 70% of the maximum, that's moderate. Another sign of moderate is that if let's say you're walking briskly with a friend, you won't always feel comfortable making complete sentences as you're talking if you're moderate. If you're walking slowly, it'll be easy to talk. But moderate, you're going to struggle a little bit to talk. Another rule of thumb for moderate, if it's a normal temperature day, After about 10 minutes, you'll start to break a sweat a little bit. So there's 3 rules of thumb for moderate. Vigorous is you're going at a heart rate more than 70%. And for most of us, vigorous would just be a few minutes, unless you're really highly trained as an athlete. Vigorous might be a few minutes at a time. If you're doing, that's really pushing it. But the research is showing lately that that might be particularly beneficial. I have that on the next slide. You've heard about step counts, and 3,800 step counts a day. You're already reducing risk of getting a dementia. As you approach 10,000, you hear the number 10,000 quite a bit, 50% reduction. But I don't like people to think they have to reach 10,000. Even less than half of that can be beneficial. The Harvard Brain Aging Study had a really, I think, fascinating result. I mean, they also showed that the step count, in this case, 5,000 to 7,500 per day, was beneficial in reducing odds of dementia. But what they found is that even people that had amyloid in their brain, if they exercised, that amyloid has less effect. So that's really exciting to me, that you're stuck having amyloid in your brain, but you're going to largely negate the amyloid effect, at least for a while, if you're exercising. To me, that's hugely powerful knowledge to have. Let's go to the next slide. And this study just came out. The question is, how important is this high intensity exercise that I mentioned? And they're looking at reducing risk for dementia. And that blue, the higher the percent is the more the dementia you're preventing. The blue dot is on the lower end, only about 10% of dementia reduction. The blue dot is people that just relied on volume of exercise and not intensity. They got in their 30 minutes a day, but it was just an easy walk, just easy. But then the red dot are the people who have at least a few minutes of they're really pushing and trying to get vigorous. And you can see a much bigger effect on reducing dementia. So I think try to get to moderate is really good. If you're able to do a few minutes of vigorous, that might be even better. But I want to say that carefully, because I know even at my age, if you're not ready and you do something vigorous too much, you're going to injure yourself. Most of us have probably experienced that. And if you injure yourself, you're probably not going to exercise at all for a while. So I'm very careful about it. I don't want to push this vigorous stuff too much. But as a concept, it's interesting. Okay, next slide. Okay, we always have to think about AI on everything we do, and we're using it quite a bit at Stanford on our research, patient care, everything. But this was a study that was in the news last summer out of MIT, and they took a bunch of volunteers, 18 to 39-year-olds, and they had them write some SAT essays. And one group, they put one group called the brain group, they did it the old-fashioned way. They just had to write the essay thinking about it, the way most of us did, right? The other group got to use chat, large language model, and the chat helped them write the essay, right? So it was pretty easy for them. And then they tested their brain networks using an EEG method. And so you see the pictures of the networks in the brain, and the brighter colors are better functioning networks. So the people that did it the old-fashioned way and used their brain, they got their networks working better. And that effect persisted even after they got done writing the essays. But the people that used chat did not engage their networks as much, and afterwards their networks were not working as well. And when they asked the people just to summarize their essay, they had to remember what they wrote, the brain people did pretty well. They just got done writing the essay. The chat people, they forgot most of what they wrote about. So this is causing a lot of alarm.
Should.
Because what does this mean? Does this mean that the generation who's growing up now, are we going to see even more dementia? Because dementia is all about the synaptic connections in the brain networks. And if we're doing something to let those networks decay even before we get older, I think we're going to have good therapies for dementia. But this is fascinating everybody. We all know this feeling. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. It's not only muscles, it's our brains too. And so that's why using your cognition and engaging is so critical. Okay, next slide. What about diet? I think important, and people have studied the Mediterranean diet for years. probably a 20 to 50% risk in getting a dementia. You can see over an 8-year period in the study on the left, people that were highly compliant with the Mediterranean diet, their curve went down at a less rate than the people who were poorly compliant with the Mediterranean diet. And I think there's nothing, there's all kinds of diets out there. It can be really confusing. It's hard to say one particular nuance of the Mediterranean diet is better than others. The Mind diet, there's all kinds of diets that follow similar principles. But I think the idea is avoiding massive hits of sugar. There's a debate on meat going on, but try to avoid inflammatory foods is the idea, I think, with the Mediterranean diet. We get a lot of questions about alcohol. I think for decades we were taught that 1 or 2 drinks is probably good for your health. And now with more advanced statistical methods, the conclusion is that was not quite true, possibly. And it's called because of abstainer bias, they call it. So when they survey people and somebody says, well, I don't drink anything at all, and we follow those people and they end up having a few cardiac or brain problems, you think, see, not drinking at all was not good for you. But it turns out the bias is there was probably a reason why they weren't drinking at all. It's because they were having some medical issues in the past that they might have not talked about. So unfortunately, the data showing not drinking at all might be good. However, I don't push that because it's about quality of life as well. People want to have a glass or 2 of wine. I don't discourage that. But anyway, that's the most recent, research on alcohol. Go to the next slide. And we can discuss any of these more, but I want to just share an overview with you. What about sleep? Here's a study, many of these studies, this is over a 14-year period. They looked at just people coming down with Alzheimer's and people with a sleep disorder, apnea being the most common, trouble, episodes of not breathing. You can see they got their dementia, 3 or 4 years earlier than people without sleep disorders. So we, recommend trying to get good sleep. There's debate in everything. Some people argue, okay, what's causing what? Is it that lack of high quality sleep promotes dementia? That's what you'll often hear. My job as a scientist is to always do a deep dive as a contrarian, right? That's how I'm trained. I always go at it on both arguments. I never just listen to one argument. I wish all our kids could learn that. But the other argument is the parts of the brain that are affected first before cognition are the sleep centers. And so it's the Alzheimer's that's causing the disrupted sleep, not the other way around. So people are debating that. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think disrupted sleep, there are mechanisms where it can contribute to coming down with the dementia. I still recommend trying to get whatever's right for you, 7, 8 hours, but just to know there's debate. Okay, next. And cognitive activity and purpose. I think this is so important. The study on the left looked at, again, coming down with the dementia or not. And people in the high cognitive activity line, the blue versus the red, they come down, a few years later with their dementia. What do they mean by high cognitive activity? You can see the activities there. Time they spend reading books, magazines, writing letters, playing board games. There's not any one particular magical cognitive activity. It's being engaged cognitively. And then a life purpose. I found this fascinating. There have been 2 or 3 studies like this now. People in the blue line have the higher life purpose, and they're not coming down with dementia as often as people in the yellow line that have lower life purpose. There's different scales of measuring life purpose. So I think the bottom line is use your cognition as much as you can, be engaged, and try to be on a mission. If you're no longer in the working age, find something you care about to contribute to. And I think these are also apply to people who are already dealing with some cognitive impairment. Next slide. What about supplements and commercial products? We get asked about this quite a bit. This is a $20 billion a year industry. Doesn't mean any of them work. But omega-3s get a lot of attention. The studies have been mixed on those. I think they might help a little bit. we really don't know. Eating fish 2 or 3 times a week might be just as effective as taking omega-3 capsules. So I'm not aware of any big downsides. They might help a little bit, but it's not really clear. The studies have been inconsistent. Vitamin D. Well, I have one area of vitamin D I will make a conclusion on. I would rather not be low. I think if your vitamin D is normal, taking supplements probably won't help. But what we're seeing is epidemiologically, people with low D are probably at higher risk. And a study just came out that people with low D on their tau PET scans have more tau accumulating, abnormal tau accumulating in their brain. So I would ask my primary care doctor, make sure you're checking my vitamin D. I just don't want it to be low. Vitamin B complex, many small studies, they contradict each other. We really don't know. It might be a little helpful, but it's not clear. Prevagen, you can pick some of this up at CVS. And I've had patients take this and say it's helping them. I don't like to take hope away from people. I'm very careful about this. As if I'm providing care for somebody, I think, okay, if you can afford it and I don't think it's harmful, that's wonderful, that's great. As a scientist, there is absolutely no data that this does anything. There's no rationale why it would do anything. A person with no medical training at all read that calcium is good for brain cells. Well, all your cells need calcium to function. And they read that jellyfish have calcium. All animals have calcium. And so they hired somebody to purify a protein from jellyfish, and that's what this stuff is. It's that jellyfish protein, and when you ingest a protein, your stomach and intestines break it down almost immediately. That protein does not go into your blood. So as I say, there's no basis why this would ever work, and there's no evidence that it would work. That's my scientist hat. And then Nuriva, it's got a slightly better story, but still no data. It's got a coffee fruit extract with a growth factor called BDNF. Again, that's a protein that when you take it orally is broken down immediately, and there's no BDNF that gets to the blood. In fact, they even checked for that. They could not detect any BDNF. And then phosphatidylserine is a lipid. It's been around for decades. Yes, the brain has lipids, but doesn't mean giving a lipid will help. So again, no evidence for this one too. So I hate to splash cold water, but there's, I don't recommend these things. Okay. Next. Okay. Let's go move into the more powerful therapeutics or potentially more powerful. You've probably read about the amyloid antibodies, lecanemab and donanemab. These are FDA approved for people with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia due to Alzheimer's. So they're given intravenously. This is an antibody that recognizes that amyloid and helps remove it from the brain. So on the left-hand side there, that red and yellow, that's an amyloid PET scan. That's an Alzheimer's patient or an MCI patient with high amyloid in their brain. And after treatment, then the scan on the right, you see some reduction of amyloid. So this treatment does successfully lower amyloid in the brain, but unfortunately, the effect on cognition is pretty small. I mean, it's there, and that's why the FDA approved it. So on the graph, you're seeing over an 18-month period, the blue line's placebo, cognition is getting worse over the 18 months, and that's what we expect with an MCI or Alzheimer's patient. And then the orange line are the patients on the lecanemab. The slope is slightly less. So they're progressing at a slightly slower rate, and that's why it got approved. And so it's a very personal decision. Do you want to go on one of these? And some of you may have had family members or friends dealing with that decision. It's an intravenous therapy. One's every 2 weeks. The other one's every 4 weeks. We require 6 or 7 MRI scans because these amyloid antibodies can cause brain swelling, can cause the blood vessels in the brain to leak, can cause hemorrhage. So there's some serious side effects with these. There's some quality of life issues, going to get an IV treatments, going to get brain scans. Some people say, well, for this small effect and for this risk and for the effect on quality of life, I don't want it. We've had other patients say, I want to do everything. I'm going to try it. So a personal decision. But this is the best that's available now in terms of what's FDA approved that we can treat you with. Semaglutide, this is one of the GLP-1 agonists, the weight loss drugs that you've read so much about. There was a lot of theory of why these might slow cognitive loss in Alzheimer's patients. So two large phase 3 trials were completed this past December in MCI and mild dementia, mild Alzheimer's patients. And unfortunately, no effect whatsoever. The red line is the placebo, cognition going down over the 156-week period here. And then the blues, the drug, and you can see no effect whatsoever. So before these results came out, people were adamant that these drugs were going to slow progression of cognitive loss. And this is why doing a trial is so important. And unfortunately, no evidence at all. So trying to prevent loss of cognition is not a reason to be on these drugs. People may have other reasons, but I would not be on these drugs in an attempt to slow cognitive loss. These drugs have important side effects as well, so I would not recommend this routinely. Okay, next slide. What about lithium? We've got a lot of questions about that. Friend of mine at Harvard, Bruce Yankner, published a paper in mice that giving us a new form of lithium, help those Alzheimer's mice out. And you can buy low-dose lithium online. Should you be taking it? The theory is that the normal lithium in the brain gets soaked up by the amyloid plaques, so there's a shortage of lithium and it creates problems. And so if we supplement with more lithium, it could help the situation. That's the theory, at least. But there was a recent small phase 2 trial of lithium in humans, and you can see over time here, over a 2-year period, the placebo group coming down with some dementia, with some cognitive impairment, but the lithium group did the same as the placebo. So no, they're not able to detect any effect with lithium. And the person that led this study has dedicated his life to understanding lithium in the brain. And this is what he says: I get many questions from middle-aged and older adults, including some with MCR dementia, about taking lithium to protect the brain. And he says, it's not based on systemic clinical data, and this is not something I recommend. So here's somebody who's dedicated their life to understanding lithium, and he's not recommending it. So again, the low dose is probably not harmful, but this is what the data is telling us. I do these drill downs because, like all areas of medicine, brain health, it's so faddish. Every year there's a fad on something that's supposed to work, right? And I love drilling through fads with data, right? So besides going to med school, I did a PhD in neuroscience too. So I'm all about the data and crushing fads and crushing mythology. So I just want the truth and the data. I don't want to hear about the latest fad in Silicon Valley, but this is the data, right? So, okay. All right, what about creatine supplements? Another fad, right? And probably for, exercise or muscles or bodybuilding or whatever, I think there's some reasonable data there. But now we have the claim that taking creatine will improve cognitive function in people with MCI or Alzheimer's. Here's the one clinical study that's been done, very short, only 8 weeks. You really need a year or a year and a half, to look at cognitive effects. Unblinded trial. The unblinding is very important because placebo effect is very, very, very powerful. If anyone ever mentions to you that something does something for the brain, your first question is, was it blinded? And usually it wasn't. And if it's not blinded, it means essentially nothing. And so they, in their overall cognitive assessment with the mini mental status exam, they were not able to detect any effect of creatine. That's the conclusion of the study. Now, in retrospect, when they went back and looked at the individual test, there was one test, working memory, that showed a little small improvement. So if you're biased, you'll just quote that part. But if you're a scientist and you look at all the data, you'll say, well, right now, we don't have any great overall data for creatine. So I would say this might be helpful. They're continuing to test it. I think it's pretty safe. So I'm open to this, but this is what the data is telling us so far. No one's going to tell me that creatine has been proven to work. Okay. All right, next. Okay, now we're going to move into what we've been working on, and then we'll wrap up. So, there have been many failures in this field, and I think the challenge has been it's all about losing the synaptic connections, and we've got many things, many forces causing degeneration of those synapses. We've got the amyloid, we've got the tau, we've got the inflammation. And most of the treatments go after just one of these. You saw the amyloid antibodies. Well, why aren't they more effective? Well, because you've got the other things going on. There have been trials going after tau. None of them have shown any effects so far because you've got the other things. There have been trials with anti-inflammatory strategies, not effective so far. It's a whack-a-mole game, unfortunately. But we've come up with a therapy that's designed to make synapses resilient against all three of these things. So we're hoping this will be a lot more effective than what's been tried so far. And as Susan mentioned, it wasn't me on the cover of Time. It was our drug a few years ago. And they did a story because it's such a fascinating journey creating this approach here. But we launched this approach because it harnesses the very powers of brain development. My bias is that Alzheimer's is a powerful disease, as well as these other dementias like Lewy bodies. These are very, very powerful diseases, unfortunately. If somebody's actually really does have Alzheimer's, no one has survived it. It's like pancreatic cancer. Just no one's going to survive. That's powerful. And we can't come at it with not powerful therapeutics. The therapeutics have to reflect that power. So we're harnessing the power of what develops the brain in this therapy. So we can go to the next slide. We're gonna come back to the synaptic connections. They're the bottom line here. This is just a reminder. So we've designed a drug. It's called LM11A31. We call it C31 for short. We'll be coming up with a better name. It has to be approved though. That addresses these mechanisms to make synapses resilient. And nature has told us this is doable. There are a small number of people that accumulate massive amounts of amyloid in their brain, and they make it into their 80s with normal cognition. It's a small number of people. We call them resilient. So resilience is another key word for today. Resilient against the amyloid. You could be resilient against tau. And if we could understand those resilience mechanisms, we can have powerful therapies. So we create a therapy so everyone's resilient. So we think the drug we've created here has some of those same mechanisms so that we can confer resilience for all of us, not just the lucky few. Okay, next slide. And this is an example of that testing in different forms of Alzheimer's mice in our Stanford laboratories. And the work we do in the laboratories is what makes moving into humans possible. As I mentioned before, this is, we get NIH and other grant funding, but in a community setting like this, I just want to acknowledge so many people in the community here who, through gifts to our lab, have made this work possible. That's what allows us to do this. But we can take a normal mouse and look at one of the connections in the hippocampus, the part of the brain for memory that was mentioned. Those are the little spines. And you can see in the Alzheimer's mouse treated with placebo in the middle, they've lost many of these spines. This is what happens in a human with Alzheimer's, right? And we let the mice lose the spines first. We let them get to a late stage. Then we treated with our drug. This is an oral drug. And look at the spines come back. So we think might even be some possibility of some extent of recovery with this drug. We don't know yet, but we're seeing that in the mice. So next slide. So we've done 3 clinical trials, so in humans, not mice. And the most recent was what we call a phase 2A safety and exploratory endpoint trial in 5 countries in Europe and 18 sites. We enrolled mild to moderate Alzheimer's patients, so a little bit more advanced stage than the kind of patients that are typically studied now. Usually people like to start with MCI, earlier stage, but we went later because we really wanted to see if this drug could do something. Randomized study, blinded with placebo. Remember I said never believe an unblinded trial. 241 subjects, and the longest since this is a whole new approach, the longest we could treat was 6 months. Our next trial will go for 18 months, which will be more ideal. But next slide. Oh, back to that other slide. This is Anne and I at a clinic in Barcelona. We visited the clinical sites. We wanted to meet patients and their families. We took our kids on a few of these, and they got to see all the clinics in Europe. They complained they didn't get to see any of the fun stuff, but they saw neurology clinics throughout Europe. And I think now that they're older adults, I think they appreciated that experience, right?
Well, your daughter is going to be a doctor.
Yeah, so I think she got something out of it. So our son too. So, okay, next slide. Oh, by the way, Anne was not there as a tourist. Anne is the founding CEO of our company, and she put together our original investor group that made the whole trials possible. So she's the CEO and business person. I'm just the science nerd. So I wouldn't be talking about any of this without Anne having launched our company. So she's there on business. Okay, so our phase 2 trial was really successful. It was safe, and it affected 5 biomarker categories, and no other trial has done that. Structural MRI, that's watching the brain shrink. FDG PET, it's kind of a PET scan that indicates synaptic function. We did spinal taps, and so cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, indicators of synaptic status, going back to the synapses and inflammation, responded to the drug. Measuring proteins in the spinal fluid responded. And remember the blood test. In our placebo group, the phospho-tau 217 kept going up in the placebo group. But in our drug group, it arrested it completely, stopped going up. So really excited about this. So we visited with the FDA. This is a really critical FDA meeting. It's called an end of phase 2 FDA meeting in person. And they approved our ability to move on to what we call a pivotal trial, where if we're successful there, then the drug can be available to people. And so we're in the planning stages for that trial. We hope to start it by the end of 2026, but it all depends on fundraising by our company because these trials are very expensive. And we'll also be in a more rare dementia called PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy. There's an NIH-funded trial about to start, and our drug was selected, or one of 3 drugs selected for that trial. So we're so excited about to be in those patients starting this summer. Go to the next slide. So to wrap up then, we're excited about, a new therapy. We hope it's more powerful, and we're excited about the FDA approval to go move on. That's hard to get. It's a parallel effort. We continue to work on mechanisms in our Stanford laboratory so that these drugs can work even better. And then our dream for the future is when you initially test these drugs, you test them in patients with cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's, because you can determine more quickly if they're slowing down the disease or stopping it. But the ultimate use of our drug, based on its mechanism of action, is prevention. Remember I said we've got a 20-year window to work with? This mechanism would be perfect for that. If you're 50, 55 or 60, maybe you had a parent with Alzheimer's, you had some increased risk, maybe your tau 217 is high, maybe your amyloid's high, but you're still okay. You could start a drug like this and maybe delay onset by 10 or more years. If we can delay onset of Alzheimer's by 10 years, which I think is a tractable mission, you eliminate 90% of Alzheimer's in the world. So that's a very powerful thing that we could potentially do. So that's our goals, is prevention. And so anyway, I want to leave time for questions. So thank you.
Absolutely. Our word of the day was synapse. And it appears with the pictures you showed, the synapses were actually grew back.
Yes.
Or the connections regained.
Came back.
So that would be one thing for someone with Alzheimer's to recover from their symptoms, correct?
Right.
But I think the word that you said about prevention, that's a game changer, because my understanding is Alzheimer's starts developing in our brain in our 30s. So if you have a genetic strong relationship or whatever, that's a game changer for everybody with
That's
disease.
the goal, is to have a very powerful therapeutic that's safe, number one, that could be just taken to prevent. Yeah, that's where you want to be.
And I'm not going to take everyone's questions, but I want to know when, where, and how. But Dupy, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the phase 2 trial, we had 4, side effect profiles, and fortunately, pretty mild. So a transient, meaning less than 30 days, diarrhea in about 14%, and some sore throat in a few, headache in about 6% that was transient, resolved in less than 30 days, and some increase in a white blood cell called eosinophil. If those go up with allergies, again, transient in a small portion. So that was the side effect profile. So that, is relatively acceptable. So it's metabolized in the blood. So enzymes in the blood, amidases, break it down in the blood. So not liver or kidney metabolism. It's metabolized in the blood, and then the components are excreted in the urine. I'm trying to go in order here. I don't know who was first. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any reason to think that your drug might work on any of the other types?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Is there any reason to think our drug might work on other forms of dementia? Yes, yes, and yes. So, these mechanisms, again, are fundamental, conferring synaptic resilience. And we're losing synapses in Parkinson's and other diseases, Huntington's disease. And so we've tried it in mouse versions of other dementias as well. And we're seeing it be really highly effective. I think it's because we're at such a fundamental level. So there are other entities in the country, like the Huntington's disease study group, for example. It's another terrible neurodegenerative disease that there's no treatment for. They're very interested in testing this drug. So I think we'll see it applied in other diseases as well. And we've got some collaborators in Canada that are working with Parkinson's mice, and they're seeing effects. So we're optimistic about that. Yeah.
So it might impact Lewy body?
Oh, for sure. This would be a great drug for Lewy body. Yeah. I wish our company was bigger. I wish we were a big pharma. We'd have all these trials going on. Yeah. Yeah. So, yes.
I feel so fortunate to live here and have access to all this. This is amazing. I came here for my parents, and now I'm thinking about myself. But I was wondering if you could touch a little on the hereditary aspect. I'm sure I can Google it, but I'd love to hear your take on that. It wasn't on your slides. You somewhat touched on it at the end, but
Sure. Yeah.
how does one think about that?
Yeah. What about the hereditary aspect? Great question. So I'll talk about sporadic Alzheimer's first. That's 98% of Alzheimer's, what we call late onset. And that's as opposed to the 1 or 2% that's very genetic. It's an autosomal dominant. We can talk about that separate. But for the late onset, when we say late onset, dementia starting after age 60 is the rule of thumb that we use. If you've had a parent with Alzheimer's, you as a person are about 2 to 3 times more likely to come down with it. So you are at some increased risk. And then the other aspect hereditary is looking at your ApoE gene. If you heard about that, it's the most powerful hereditary gene. So the ApoE gene makes a protein that carries cholesterol around your body, and it comes as 3 types. So it's spelled APOE, and it can have an ApoE 2, 3, or 4 versions of the gene. And most of your genes you have 2 copies of. So if you have a type 4, you're at increased risk. If you've done 23andMe, you can find out your ApoE risk. You'll have to do a few extra clicks because it'll ask you, are you sure you want to know this, right? We can talk about that. So if you have a type 4, you're, again, about 2 to 3-fold increased risk. And about 20% of the population has a type 4, 1 copy of type 4. And then now, would you want to know this? It's very personalized. Some people say, well, is there something actionable I can do? You've got a drug for me if I have E4. And I say, not yet. Say, well, I don't want to know. That's fine. Other people say, well, if I've got this 4 and I'm at increased risk, I'm going to start exercising. So that's a personal decision. Now I say to people, hopefully you exercise anyway in terms of cancer and heart disease and everything else. But those are some of the discussions that we have. So you can find out. So I would say parent and the ApoE genetic status, and these are all just risks. Doesn't mean you'll get it for sure.
Would this drug be something that would be more likely to be given to someone with this type 4 gene then?
In some cases, yeah. So I think where medicine is heading is, so-called precision medicine, right? We're going to take you as an individual. What did your parents have it? What's your ApoE status? What's your tau 217 in your blood? Depending on what age you are you having any symptoms or not? We're going to put all this together, and then we're going to decide on which therapeutic, whether you should have any therapeutic or which therapeutic you should have. All therapies have side effects related to the earlier question. We say in therapeutics development, if there's no side effects, there's no drug, right? All real drugs have side effects, all have risks, right? There's no free ride on therapeutics. So we're going to customize that risk profile to you. And then with our help, hopefully we'll make that decision of whether you'll take it or not. But I would say, yeah, if I had an E4, had a parent with it, my tau 217 is up, I would love to be on our drug.
How do we do that?
How do we what?
Get on your drug?
We can't right now. Until it makes it through trials, we can't just, I've had so many requests. I even had my cousin Loretta, who died recently with Alzheimer's. Her husband, Tony, called me, said, Frank, can you give some of your drug to Loretta? And Loretta was a PhD. She was brilliant. And I was just devastated. I followed her along. And for my own cousin, I just couldn't make drug available.
How about if we could get in the trials?
Well, yeah, I hope that when we're able to launch our next trial, it'll be at over 100 sites in North America and Europe. Stanford would very likely be a site. I personally will not be running it at Stanford because of the conflict of interest, but one of my colleagues probably will be. And then you would enroll in the trial, and we'll design the trial. Most trials nowadays are being designed with what we call open label at the end. So the initial part will be a placebo and drug. So you do risk being on a placebo, but as the reward, we say, okay, after the 18-month initial treatment, everyone's going to be on drug. So I would just be waiting for that. That's all. That's the best we can do. I hope we can move faster. But
I have two online questions, and I'll try to read them here. 10 years ago, I took a gerontology class. Back then, the Alzheimer's Association used to say that your odds of dementia doubled every 5 years after age 65. That by age 85, your chances were 50%. A couple of years later, I noticed AA no longer promulgated that message. Is this still considered true?
yeah, the question is, as we age, what are the risks of us having a dementia? It goes up with age. I mean, this is an age-dependent disease. And the statistics change over time, as the questioner is alluding to. I think right now we say by age 85, I would say most studies will say there's a 30 to 40% of us will have Alzheimer's or dementia by age 85. So it's not quite the 50%. So the questioner is right. Why it's come down, I don't know. I don't know if it's the statistical methods are different, or we're doing some other things in a little more healthy way, or diet or exercise. But that's a ballpark number, 30 to 40% by the time we're 85. Hopefully we'll all change that. I think we can change it a little bit through the lifestyle interventions that I discussed, and hopefully we'll have some more powerful therapeutics to really lower it.
And one other online question, what can you say about, Namenda, memantine?
Yeah, Namenda is the brand name, memantine is the generic name. This is one of what we call symptomatic drugs. So we have disease-modifying drugs. Those are ones that actually attack the root causes of the disease and prevent it or slow it down. That's what we're developing. The other category are symptomatic drugs. They can boost the neurotransmitters a little bit or how they work and make symptoms a little bit better, but unfortunately, they don't slow the progression of the disease. So the memantine, or the brand name Namenda, is a symptomatic drug that's commonly given. It can help memory function a little bit temporarily, maybe over 6 to 12 months, but it won't slow the disease down. But it's commonly used. It's been FDA approved for more than 20 years. So it's a symptomatic drug.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Can you speak to more of, do you understand the mechanism of how your drug is able to promote synaptic growth?
Yes, we do. Thank you for asking. And again, I can't include everything. So our drug is what we call a small molecule. It's taken orally, gets through the blood-brain barrier, which is a big accomplishment. 99% of small molecules don't. Gets in the brain, and it binds to a receptor called the P75 neurotrophin receptor that's on the surface of neurons. There's other cells as well. What this receptor does, what receptors do is when something binds to them, like our drug, it controls signaling inside the neuron. And the network of signaling that this receptor controls dictates whether that neuron keeps a synapse or not. So during brain development, we create about twice as many neurons and synaptic connections than we need. And during our childhood, we prune them. So pruning is another key word today. We prune the excess synapses that we're not using. It's a powerful force. It dictates life or death of a neuron. There's nothing more powerful than life or death, right? And so this receptor is one of the key regulators of pruning the synapses. So what we discovered, and now other people around the world, is what a coincidence. The receptor that's controlling pruning is also regulating mechanisms that are upregulated in Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's, we get this upregulation of these degenerative signals that led to pruning. Now, when you're 65 years old, the last thing you want to do is prune synaptic connections, and that's what's going on in Alzheimer's. So we're a small molecule regulating the P75 receptor. We're a receptor modulator that shifts the intracellular signaling from degenerative to survival, resulting in reducing the accumulation of pathologic tau and reducing the loss of synapses. So we know a lot about the mechanisms. That's what we do in my Stanford lab. The company does the trial. But good question. Yeah. There was another question over here. Yeah. Mhm.
Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah.
I know people that almost, and they're good to the brain, the remember news,
Yeah.
I'm doing that. But I don't know.
So yeah, so the question is, you're from Brazil, and there are Brazilian nuts that you eat that are supposed to be good for the brain. And I don't know about the Brazilian nuts specifically, but I know nuts in general are said to have the omega-3s, linoleic acid, which is related to omega-3s. So those things all could be beneficial. I think they would fit under the scope of a so-called Mediterranean diet. I mean, they use that term Mediterranean, but I think there's equivalents in Asia and India and everywhere else, right? So I think you're doing some of that, which could be beneficial. I'm okay with doing things that have a rationale for being beneficial, and number two, are probably safe. But no one's ever done a trial with nuts, so I can't prove that they're beneficial. But I don't want to take that hope away from you. So keep eating the nuts. We can't prove it. Yeah, so I think that's fine. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so you're asking about the environmental factors, the contributing to Alzheimer's. It's a big topic now. So the National Institutes of Aging, I'm on the council that oversees the NIH work in Alzheimer's. And we approved a number of programs over the last couple of years to put a lot more funding into looking at environmental factors that include some of the things you mentioned. I mean, air pollution, pesticides. And the theory is that they can promote inflammation as well as other factors. Pesticides are particularly relevant to Parkinson's. The neurons that lose their connections in Parkinson's are really vulnerable to pesticides for some reason. So yes, a lot of research there. It's complicated research because it's associative, right? People that live in these high environmental suboptimal conditions might be getting Alzheimer's more, but what's really causing it? Because those same people, unfortunately, often have poor health care. So is it the poor health care or is it the environment? But this research will help sort that out. I think there's something there because these environmental issues trigger inflammation, and I think inflammation is a big part of this disease. Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I'm not grandparents, have anything to do with their sociodynamics, being surrounded by family, or is there any commonality?
Yeah. Well, you're asking about resilience and being surrounded by family in a optimal social environment. I think the social engagement and the family, I think that contributes to synapses surviving. It's use it or lose it. So I think that can contribute to resilience. Now, but you need other things too. Unfortunately, it's not enough alone, but I think it can be a contributing factor. Those synapses are very much use it or lose it.
Any
So-
other,
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to conclude with one thing. This is Portola Valley, Woodside, and Atherton, all in Stanford's backyard. So we want to be able to support you in your efforts at the Stanford Research Lab. But in addition, how can we support what you're doing with your company to get on the list?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, maybe Ann can answer the company part.
So right now, as Frank mentioned, we got FDA approval to do a pivotal trial. Very exciting, but a little daunting because it's going to cost about $360 million.
So $360 million, we're not asking anyone for $360 million, but what we are doing right now is we are raising some initial money in what's called a SAFE round for investments. So that's a much smaller amount just to kind of get us across this bridge before we launch the big trial, before we start the big capital raise. And what it's going to allow us to do is build out a core leadership team and then continue on steps, getting ready, teeing up for this last trial. Currently, Frank and I have been at this for almost 20 years on our own, which is a miracle. And we're still very happily married and we've made a lot of progress. But we did just recently, a few months ago in January, I was the CEO, the founding CEO, and we hired a full-time, dedicated, seasoned biotech CEO who started in January. And we need to now hire a CMO, a chief medical officer, and again, just build out that core leadership team. We're in discussions with pharma. It's possible we could get acquired or partner. And we're still working with NIH. We're talking to government. We're going to be on Capitol Hill next month. I mean, we are just we're firing all angles here. So any support, interest, both, either to Frank's lab or to the company, talk to us. But most importantly, we just want you to be educated and informed so you can do what's best for you and for your family members. So thank you.
We will include in the follow-up email to everybody that's here copies of the presentations, and you can even have a copy of the event as well. But we'll include links to that to be able to support your efforts.
That would be great. And thank you, Ann. And I want to just do shout out to our colleagues at Kensington Sequoia. As they were talking, about working with patients and the Alzheimer pathology that I showed you, the amyloid and the tau and the inflammation, it starts in different people in different parts of the brain. And that's why each individual is unique. So it often starts in the memory parts of the brain. The hippocampus was mentioned, but not always. Sometimes it starts in the visual centers of the brain. So sometimes for some people, their very first symptom is making sense of the visual world. They'll get lost, or they'll look for something in the refrigerator and they can't find it, but it's right in front of them, right? Or they're not sure who that is. It's a visual. Other people, the pathology starts in the frontal lobes. Well, your frontal lobe is in charge of executive function and turning down things, like turning down fear or turning down dumb decisions, right? Our teenagers, their frontal lobes aren't completely matured yet, right? So you'll have some, misjudgments or being vulnerable to scams, right? Because the frontal lobes supervise those decisions. So that's why people with Alzheimer's and the other dementias present differently, and that's why they're cared for differently. And part of the cognitive testing we do, families often find that helpful because we'll show a whole profile. Okay, their memory is still pretty good, but their visual recognition is a mess, or their executive function is shot. And that helps the family realize, okay, this is, and then another principle is 50% of people with Alzheimer's dementia, and this is true in most of the other dementias, have anosognosia. If any of you speak Greek, you'll know what that means. Anosognosia, not knowing what you don't know. Agnosia, loss of knowledge. So anosognosia, meaning that half people with the dementia have no awareness of their dementia. That's really important to know, when you're working with patients or family members. That comes up professionally too. I've been in a number of professional boards and settings where a person with a really critical job has their colleagues are concerned with their performance. But the person says, I'm fine. I don't know what they're worried about. But they have early stages of a dementia. My job as a neurologist is to, deal with that. So that's why I know all about agnosia. So, we keep that in mind too, as we work with people.
Well, thank you, Dr. Longo, and thank you for everybody else and all the questions. And I have a very important person in the back who's been very, very involved in all of this planning for this event. And he actually has a great idea for helping your memory. Dr. Longo can learn from this. Why don't you tell us about it, Ken?
Two quick comments. One, thank you to the town of Woodside and Dick, and thank you to Atherton and Portola Valley for putting this together. I think it's very valuable. I appreciate the towns taking lead in this because it's a different form and different method than you find in most of the applications where we have these discussions. And finally, I want to give a shout out to what the doctor said about the diet and how important it is. Almonds and blueberries are incredibly important to your diet for this. We happen to have some left up here. But they have to be wrapped in flour and butter. But please take another almond or blueberry with you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as part of that diet of memory, there is a new meal at Bucks that is designed to help with memory. It's called the Power Veggie Bowl. And they literally developed it when Ken and I were sitting in the booth talking about planning the event, and Tyler McNiven came by, and Ken popped out with the idea, what kind of meal can we create that helps the memory? And that's what Tyler created. And again, it's called the Veggie Power Bowl. And we're going over there for a no-host lunch today, if anybody wants to join us. Thank you all for being here. If you have any ideas for what we might want to do for our future events, let us know. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.